Hi there and welcome. I'm Dave Litton from the Projects Academy, bringing you a short snippet from my self-study PMP primer. You know, so many people email me telling me how they're absolutely petrified of attempting any critical path analysis questions, simply because there's a bit of math involved. And as you're about to find out, it's only some simple addition and subtraction. So critical path analysis is one of the techniques that's used within the develop schedule process, which forms part of the planning process group. So buckle yourself up, this is going to be a fast ride. Let's first of all show you the planning process group and remind you that there are 5 activities here, starting with plan schedule management. It's the final one within the time management knowledge area that we're going to focus on here, which is to develop the schedule. So let's get stuck straight in. Critical path analysis. Why on earth would you want to use it? Well, 3 main reasons. It's used to calculate the end date of the project, which is pretty important, and also to calculate something called float, sometimes called slack. I'll define that shortly, and also to identify your critical path activities. It's a whole lot easier than you think. And before I show you a foolproof step-by-step system to calculate any particular network, let me just remind you that what a critical path actually is. A project's critical path is the combination of activities that, if any are delayed, the same delay will be seen on the project finish date. And the reason for that is because the definition of a critical path is that it is the longest path between the project start and finish. And the longest path must define the earliest time your project can finish. So all of the activities sitting on the critical path are called, naturally enough, critical activities. And a little note here for when we cover float: by definition, a critical activity has 0 float. Now, non-critical activities have this thing called float, and you'll also find it referred to as slack. And to really drum this in, critical activities have 0 float. Now, the way in which you link activities together within your schedule diagram are many and varied. First of all, you may find that if this little green box represents your network diagram, you may have external activities that will force dependencies on certain dates when your activities can start and finish. Imagine if your project is relying on a third party's software release. At the very least, that would mean you couldn't finish the project until that had been released. Similarly, aspects such as planning permission, or perhaps someone creating an installation manual. So they're generally called external dependencies. What I want to focus on are the dependencies that you and I control within the schedule diagram. And the first of these would be called a discretionary dependency. In other words, it's your choice. Here I've got an activity called prepare chicken and an activity called prepare salad. Which one do I do first? If there's 2 of you, you could do them at the same time. But here is the linkage with the arrow pointing towards prepare salad. So what that tells you is that the prepare chicken activity has got to be finished before you can start preparing the salad. Here's a different type. It's a mandatory dependency. Set up the barbecue, that must be finished before you can start cooking the burger. I think you'd agree that the burger isn't going to get cooked until and unless you've set up the barbecue. So the first one's up to you. This is logically dependent, if you will. Next up, the dependency type here is called a lag. Let's imagine your local mayor wants to erect a statue in honor of a famous individual, and he hires a company to do it for him. There's just 2 tasks here. There's lay the foundation of cement or concrete, if you will, wait 24 hours for it to cure and harden, and then erect the statue on top of it. So this is a finish to start relationship. You've got to have finished laying the foundation before you can erect the statue. But in addition to that, you have something called a lag, which is a delay, in this case of 24 hours. And there's a variety of reasons why you might want to put a lag between 2 activities, and this is just one such example. The reverse of that is called a lead. And here, let's imagine we're designing and coding some software. Well, we could actually start testing some of it even before we've completed designing and coding all of it. And here I've shown a finish to start relationship, but this tells the reader that we're going to start testing the software 3 days before we finished all of the design and coding. So that's called a lead. And you can take this a step further. What I've been talking about here is finish to start, but there's other flavors. Let me show you. Here's a finish to start called FS, and in this I've inserted a lag of 5 weeks. So in English this says build will start 5 weeks after design is finished. Okay, so here's another flavor. This time I've used something called start to start, Can you see the way I've linked together the start of the design activity to the start of the build activity? This in effect would mean that both design and build start at the same time, but in this case I've inserted a 4-week lag here. So in this case, build will start 4 weeks after design has started. Can you see how flexible this is starting to get? Here's another one. Here I've used a finish to finish relationship, and the trick here is to look at the arrowhead so you get the language correct. What this says is that build can't finish until design has finished, in the same way as build can't start until design has started. But in this case, just to make it a bit more fun, I've put a 15-week delay in. So what this says is that the build will finish 15 weeks after design has finished. One more for luck. This is called SF. Now, it doesn't stand for science fiction. It's actually quite a useful linkage, particularly in the construction industry where you're using common resources. This says that the design can't start until the build has finished. But I've put in a 40-week lag here, showing that the build will finish 40 weeks after design has started. And frankly, I could have used any combination here between finish to start, finish to finish, and so on, and lags and or leads. But at least you shouldn't be fazed if you should see any of these coming up in your exam. So let me start with something that's so obvious you could see it just by looking at it. 4 activities, A, B, C and D. This one's 2 weeks in duration. This is 3 weeks duration, 1 week and 2 weeks. Here's a question for you. What's the longest path here? Because the longest path will determine the earliest date that the project can finish. Well, let's just add them up. In this very simple example, there's only 2 paths. The top one, where you add up 2 plus 3 plus 2, gives you 7 weeks. And the lower one, which is 2 plus 1 plus 2, gives you 5 weeks. What you know already is that since this top path is the longest path, it alone sets the earliest time that this project can finish. In other words, in 7 weeks. Well, that's fine for a simple thing like this, but if you get a more complex one, you can't always see it, so you need to calculate it, and there's a very simple technique for doing that. And it's in 2 steps. You first of all start at the left-hand side and do what's known as a forward pass calculation. And then when you finish that, you come around and do a backward pass. And there's a few rules in each case, but they're so obvious, I think you'll get them immediately. The first thing in the forward pass is that you always add the activity durations. You'll know what that means in a second. Now, the other thing you might come across is some folks teach you that this starts on day 1, which is true, but I think it makes it easier, thinking about a time graph, if you will, that this starts at time 0. So I use 0. It really doesn't matter, because if you have 1 or 0, all of the math will come out in the wash, as you'll see. So because we're doing a forward pass, the first rule, carry forward for one task that feeds several. The first thing we know is that since this is a 2-week duration, 0 plus 2 gives you 2. And because this feeds into 2, or indeed more, we just carry it forward. So in the forward pass, we only use the top left and top right corners. Okay? We'll use the bottom ones coming backwards. So 0 plus 2 is 2. We take this 2 and we carry it forward. We simply put it top left and top left. That was easy, wasn't it? There's rule number 1. How about rule number 2, still going forward? Well, in this case, I've taken this a step further. Here's the same 2 you saw previously, and here's the final one. What do? We always add the activity durations. 2 plus 3 gives you 5. 2 plus 1 gives you 3. Now here's where the rule number 2 comes in. When you've got several going into one, you've got to make a choice, and you use the higher number when you're doing the forward pass. So we've got 5 and we've got 3. It's therefore 5 that wins, because that's the highest number. Now, just as an aside here, if you just had 2 activities, one after the other, with no extra linkages, you simply just transfer that number across. And as you'll see, we would do the same thing when coming back. So let me just add in the calculations for you. They're fairly straightforward. 5 plus 2 is 7, okay? This is now the end of the forward pass in this simple example. When we go back, we now subtract the activity durations, and we'll use one of 2 rules, and that is for 1 into several, carry the number back. Now first, watch this carefully. As this is the last task, you take whatever number is here and you stick it down there. That's all you have to do. And now subtract the activity durations. So 7 minus 2 gives you 5. And now we've got to use the rule. It's very simple. Ignore the arrowheads. We're looking back on links to previous tasks. we simply take that 5, and because we're now using the bottom two corners, we just stick the 5 there and the 5 there. Pretty easy, wasn't it? So we're still on the backward pass, and now we're subtracting the activity duration. 5 minus 3 gives you 2, 5 minus 1 gives you 4. Now we've got a choice, and this is where backward pass rule number 2 comes in. It's the last one. When you've got several into one, carry back the lowest number, because now we've got a choice, haven't we? We've got a 2 here and we've got a 4 here. It must be the 2 because it's the lowest number. So we put that back here, and now we're almost done. 2 minus 2 gives you 0, and that's it. But although we've finished the main calculation, we still haven't got a resolution on what this complex project's about. So here comes the analysis. What you've got for every single task, in this case just 4 of them, you've got top left number here A and a bottom left B, a top right C and a bottom right D. What you compare is either the front pair or the back pair to work out which tasks are critical and which tasks are non-critical. It really is as easy as that. And either the front pair or the back pair both will give you the same answer, as I've said here. If the difference between these two numbers is 0, in other words, they're both the same number, then that's a critical task. If there is a difference between these, then these are non-critical tasks, and that difference gives you the float. And I've just been sticking these numbers outside of little boxes. You may well see it drawn more neatly like this, where you have a box representing an activity, and top left is where A goes, bottom left is where B goes, and so on. You'll notice now they're given names, which I'll come to. This stands for earliest start, this stands for earliest finish. These are the ones you calculated in the forward pass. Coming back, this is the latest finish and latest start. You calculated these numbers in the backward pass. And you normally put the duration of the task here, the name in the middle, and the amount of float and slack here. So now I've got a realistic example to show you, something similar that you might find in an exam. And it's a little project that a friend of mine did for his children in his backyard. We made a playhouse, literally out of wood. It took us over a day, and we probably enjoyed ourselves more than the kids playing in it. Here's the activities, and here's the duration in hours as it happens for me and my chum. So let's carry out that calculation system I've just taught you. What's the first thing you do? You stick a 0 top left. And because we're doing the forward pass, rule number 1, of course, is to add the durations. 0 plus 2 gives you 2, of course. Now, what's our second rule here? Well, it was when you've got one task feeding into many, just transfer the number that's top right. So we put a 2 here, here, and here. That's it. Now we add the durations because we're in the forward pass. 2 plus 3 gives you 5, 2 plus 2 gives you 4, and 2 plus 7 gives you 9. Well, before we get stuck into the ones at the top, here's a couple that are just in series. So that's dead easy, isn't it? I'll just take whatever number's here and I put it here. Job done. Okay, let's have a look up here. This is where rule number 3 of forward pass. This time we've got several activities feeding into one. We've got to use the highest number. Not hard, is it? It's the 5, and that's what we put here. Now we add the duration to that. 5 plus 4 gives you 9. In fact, we can do the same down here, can't we? 9 plus 5 gives you 14. Well, now we've got a decision to make, since we've got 2 into 1. Well, it's not a problem, because I've already given you rule 3. Use the highest number, 9 or 14, it's got to be 14. 14 plus 6 gives you 20. Now that's an interesting number. Watch carefully, because that is your project's earliest finish time. So in the forward pass, you'll know the earliest finish time. It takes the backward pass to work out which tasks are critical and how much float there is. So let's do it right now. Now, what do we do in the backward pass? We subtract durations. But let's first of all look at our rule number 4. We need to transfer the last number. Well, what we've got to do is take this 20 and add it down here, like so. Now, of course, we subtract all the durations. So 20 minus 6 gives you 14. Now when we're coming back, looking backwards if you will, we can see that this activity feeds into 2 activities. Don't worry about the arrowheads, it's just a linkage. So for when you've got 1 into many, you just transfer. However, this time, because it's the backward pass, we're using the bottom corners. So we take this 14 and we put it there, and we put it there. Job done. Now we can just subtract the durations in each case. 14 minus 4 is 10. 14 minus 5 gives you 9. Again, we can just transfer this straight across since it's a single link. How about up here? Well, I don't have to repeat it. You know that whatever number is here, you just transfer it back to the 2 tasks that are feeding it. So because these 2 activities are in series, we just transfer that 9 back to there. Now up here we've got one activity, if you will, feeding back into two. So we use rule number 6. For one into one or many, just transfer. So we put the 10 there and we put the 10 there. Now we can subtract the durations. 10 minus 3 gives you 7. 10 minus 2 gives you 8. And down here, 9 minus 7 gives you 2. Well, now we've got our final rule, haven't we? Rule number 7. For several activities that are feeding back, if you will, into one, this time we use the lowest number, not the highest number as we did in the forward pass. So we've got 7, we've got 8, and we've got 2. Well, that's the one. So we put 2 here, and now we just subtract the duration, and we're back to 0. That's all the math done on a typical type of exam question. Wasn't exactly hard, was it? But before we do the analysis, I just want to give you a few more pointers. And to remind you that the critical path is a sequence of activities through the activity network from start of your project to the finish of it. And the sum of the critical path activities, their duration determines the overall plan duration and thereby the earliest finish date of your project. Because although the critical path is the longest path, it actually represents the shortest time in which a project can be completed. If you've understood that, you've got the very heart of the matter. And here's how you might see it represented, rather than just a square box. This being the earliest start time, earliest finish time, latest start time, latest finish time. And since the critical task has 0 float, these two numbers will always be the same. And so will these two numbers always be the same, even though of course the numbers will be different by the duration of the activity. So you can either use the front vertical pair or the back vertical pair to work out whether we've got a critical task or a non-critical task. Remember, if these numbers, either the front pair or the back pair, are the same, this is a critical activity. If the numbers are different, however, the difference is what's known as the total float. Yes, there's 2 flavors of float, and I'm coming to that in a moment. And therefore the total float is the numeric difference by subtracting earliest finish time from the latest finish time, as I've shown here, or subtracting the earliest start time from the latest start time. These two numbers here. It really isn't any harder than that. So let's do that for my sample I've just taken you through. Here we go again, and this time I've highlighted yellow the critical tasks so you can see more easily. How did I do that? Well, the first thing to notice, the start to and the end to are always the same in each case. Therefore the float for all of them is 0. As I'm showing you here, because by definition, critical tasks have 0 float. It's that simple. Whereas these little babies up here, these are non-critical activities. So let's see what the float is for those. I could either take 5 from 10, giving me 5, or I could have taken 2 from 7, giving me 5. Can you see? Either the front pair or the back pair. Do the same for these two. The calculations are very straightforward. Now therefore, total float, as I've just described here, is the amount of delay an activity can absorb before it delays the project end date. So running in the electrics could be delayed by 6 hours, and I'd still manage to get my children's playhouse done within 20 hours. But there's also something called free float, and I want to show you that by just using these tasks up here. I don't need the rest of them. Here we go. This was the last task. Now, as you know, by definition, critical tasks have 0 float, so these obviously aren't. And just to give you those numbers we calculated in the previous slide, there they are. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and it's the final bit of analysis. We can look at the front pair and the back pair, and what can we see? We can see already that this is 5 hours total float. This is 6 hours total float. But something's going on here. Let me show you. But look at the difference here, 9 and 14. There seems to be a difference in these numbers. This is the earliest finish time, and this is the earliest start time. There seems to be a difference of 5 hours. And similarly in this case, and the answer is, this is what's known as free float. Now it's very easy to spot. You just look for 2 tasks that are connected and look at the top 2 numbers. If they're different, as in the case of these two here, then that gives you your free float. 4 to 5 means this is 1 hour free float for running in the electrics. Now the difference being is total float is what causes the end date to slip out. Free float is the amount that this particular task can delay before it delays the start of the next or succeeding task, in this case 1 hour. So free float is the time by which an activity may be delayed or extended without affecting the start of any succeeding activity. And that total float and free float may or may not be the same. In this case, this task has got 5 hours total float. In this case, this has got 6 hours total float and 4 hours free float. Whereas in this case, Fit Windows has got 5 hours total float and 5 hours free float. So they can be the same, they can be different. And by definition, free float is the early start of the next activity. See, this is the earliest start time, subtracted from the early finish of the previous activity, which is 4, which is where you get your 1 hour. And that, folks, completes my whistle-stop tour of how to perform critical path analysis within the PMBOK process develop schedule. Well, I'm sure by now you're feeling very confident that you could tackle any network diagram and critical path analysis question in your PMP exam. And if you want to ensure that you pass your PMP exam at your first attempt, you really should get your hands on my video-based PMP primer and start preparing to become a qualified PMP. My name's Dave Litton from the Projects Academy. Do pop by and check out our growing range of project management training videos on www.projects.com. So see you soon.